Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast featuring garden history and literature. I'm Jennifer Ebling, and today is March 4th. Today in garden history, we celebrate the birthday of William Griffith, the English botanist and naturalist. He was born on this day, March 4th, in 1810. By the time a young William Griffith arrived at the Botanical Garden in Calcutta, he was eager to make his mark. But he clashed with the old ways of running the garden established by the great Nathaniel Wallach. When Nathaniel departed to tend to his deteriorating health, William was put in charge of the garden. In his youth and inexperience, he acted in haste and he executed a complete renovation of the botanical garden. For instance, there was an avenue of gorgeous cycas trees that was a signature element of the garden and beloved by visitors. But William had the entire avenue removed. And in his singular focus to organize plants by classification, he sacrificed beauty and common sense. Plants that were happy under the canopy of established trees and shrubs were suddenly exposed to the harsh Indian sun, and they burned and perished out in the open. In a little over 2 years, the garden bore no resemblance of its former glory. In September of 1844, William married his brother's wife's sister, Emily Henderson. And by the end of the year, William quit his post and left the Calcutta Botanical Garden for good. Together, William and Emily returned to Malacca in southwestern Malaysia. But William got sick on the voyage. He languished for 10 days after they arrived and then died from hepatitis. He was 34. Meanwhile, back at the Calcutta Botanical Garden, it's hard not to imagine the shock that Nathaniel Wallach experienced when he returned to the garden in the summer of 1844 and saw the complete devastation in every bed and every planting in every corner of the garden. Nothing was untouched. It had all been changed. Nathaniel shared his grief in a letter to his old friend William Hooker. He wrote, "Where is the stately, matchless garden that I left in 1842? Is this the same as that? Can it be? No, no, no. Day is not more different from night than the state of the garden as it was from its present utterly ruined condition." Well, it's worth noting that when Nathaniel sent this letter, William was still alive. Nathaniel did not know that he had gotten sick when he left the garden, but I'm sure within a few days or weeks, he would hear the news that William had passed away. Kind of a sad story all around. But today is also the birthday of Henry Frederick Conrad Sander, the German English orchidologist and nurseryman. He was born on this day, March 3rd, in 1847. And when he was 20 years old, Conrad met the Czech plant collector Benedict Rezel, and the two men struck up an idea for a business that left Benedict free to explore and collect plants, something he did best, and Conrad able to focus on what he did best, which is cultivating and selling plant specimens, especially orchids. Conrad set up shop in St. Albans, and Benedict was soon sending shipments of orchids from Central and South America. After his successful arrangement with Benedict, Conrad expanded his operations, and he soon had over 20 collectors gathering specimens, and then he was growing orchids like crazy in over 60 greenhouses. Europe's top collectors and even royalty stopped by to examine Conrad's inventory. Soon, Conrad was known as the King of Orchids, and he wrote a 2-volume masterpiece on every variety of orchid that he knew about. He named the book Reichenbachia to honor the legendary orchidologist Heinrich Gustav Reichenbach, and in return, Reichenbach honored Conrad by naming the Queen of Philippine Orchids, the Vanda Sanderiana, after Conrad Sanders. Now, the locals in the Philippines call this orchid the walling orchid, and it's considered one of the rarest, most beautiful, most expensive orchids, and it's also one of the largest species of orchids in the world. Orchids are some of the world's oldest flowering plants, producing the world's tiniest seeds. A single orchid seed pod can contain 3 million seeds. Think of that. Orchids are also the largest family of flowering plants in the world, with over 25,000 species. In fact, orchids represent about 10% of all plant species on Earth, and there are more orchids on Earth than mammals and birds. Lots of orchid fun facts. Now, once orchids are germinated, it can take 5 to 7 years for them to produce a flower. And if you look at the orchid bloom closely, you'll see that the blossom, like the human face, is perfectly symmetrical, which only adds to their visual beauty. And by the time you are buying that orchid at Trader Joe's, it's likely already decades old. But never fear, orchids are long-lived, and they can reach their 100th birthday, just like the peony. Now, the vastness and complexity of orchids can be frustrating to researchers. Charles Darwin once grew so discouraged writing his book about orchids that he wrote to a friend, "I am very poorly today, and very stupid, and hate everybody and everything." And it was on this day, March 4th, in 1949, that the Santa Cruz Sentinel out of California published a lovely story about an upcoming Arbor Day celebration that would plant trees to honor Luther Burbank. In a bittersweet gesture, nurseryman Joe Badger was personally planting a flowering plum tree. Joe's plum tree would be planted in Mrs. Burbank's garden in Santa Rosa, California, near the spot where Luther was buried. Burbank's widow said, "No, there will be no wreath laying on Luther's grave. Laying a wreath is only a ceremony. It doesn't make things grow." Instead, she and nurseryman Joe Badger, who as a youngster stole plums from the Burbank experimental gardens, will plant a flowering plum tree adjoining the Redwood Highway where passers-by can enjoy it. The flowering plum was developed by Luther. He gained worldwide fame with his Burbank potato, his spineless cactus, and many other horticultural achievements. Luther lies buried under a huge cedar of Lebanon tree in a simple, unmarked grave. Beside him lies his white dog, Bonita, who was his constant companion until Luther died in 1926. And that cedar of Lebanon tree that he is planted beneath, well, Luther himself actually planted that seed that became the tree. It was sent to him by a friend in Palestine. Luther had said many times, "When I go, don't raise a monument to me, plant a tree." And so that's just what he did. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, The Art of Outdoor Living by Scott Schrader. This book came out in 2019, and the subtitle is Gardens for Entertaining Family and Friends. For anyone who wants to live well in their garden, here's a guide to creating stylish and livable outdoor spaces for entertaining, playing, and relaxing. And Scott is a California landscape designer who has an intuitive ability to connect his outdoor landscape creations with the heart of the home. Scott's designs are known for their sense of flow, their style, and their serenity. And Scott's specialty is creating lush outdoor rooms where meals and company can be enjoyed at your leisure. Scott's blending of the indoors and the outdoors can be seen in these 12 gorgeous properties that are highlighted in this book. And Scott also shares his tips for keeping guests happy outdoors, and he breaks down how planning ahead makes outdoor spaces comfortable, inviting places you don't want to leave. And I love how Scott credits a lot of his design ingenuity to simply planning ahead, something we can all do when it comes to designing our outdoor spaces. This book also features some essays where Scott shares some in-depth observations on all aspects of outdoor living and gardens, including topics like sustainability, lifestyle, and paths. A man after my own heart loves garden paths. This book is 240 pages of making outdoor spaces comfortable places for cooking, entertaining, playing, and relaxing. You can get a copy of The Art of Outdoor Living by Scott Schrader and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for $26. Finally, we'll end today's show with a Botanic Spark featuring Norman Rowland Gale, the English poet, storyteller, and reviewer. He was born on this day, March 4th, in 1862. Norman is best known for his poem called The Country Faith, which ends with this little verse. God comes down in the rain, and the crop grows tall. This is the country faith, and the best of all. Now, in Norman's book, A Merry-Go-Round of Song, there is also a little-known, adorable poem about fairies, and I thought I would end the show with this verse today. Norman wrote, "If you could pierce with magic eyes the secrets of the lavender, you'd find 1,000 fairylings a-perching there with folded wings and pouring sweetness into her." Well, that's it for today's show. Just remember that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.